All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Jill and Ruth.
Wow. So I guess I'm wondering, could we go around and do introductions? I know a couple of you on the screen, but maybe just understanding maybe what the audience is, and that might help direct the conversation maybe a little bit more if people could introduce themselves and why they attend the meetings.
Ruth, would you like to just say the first name so that people know when their turn is to?
Sure. So on my screen, I see Lindsay.
Yeah, hi, I'm Lindsay. I am a parent of two children enrolled in Monaga School that will be seniors next year, and both will be looking at transition services. And Jill recommended this to me, so thanks for having me.
Great. And Austin?
Austin Decock with Stellar Human Services.
Okay. BJ? So BJ, where are you working now, and what are you
I am
doing?
working with Stellar Human
Okay.
Services, and I am the pre-ed specialist now.
Okay. Bobby?
I work in Waubun as an ASD DCD teacher.
Okay. Amber?
I also
You
work
could
at Becker County Human Services,
Yeah.
and Jill and Ruth invited me to attend the meeting. I also do waivered services, and they just kind of thought that I might be a good addition to attend.
And Maureen. I think we all know Maureen.
Yep, Maureen Willoughby with Vocational Rehabilitation. So,
Great.
Before I introduce myself, Maureen, do you know for both Wadena and Monaga, is it a different voc rehab case manager that they would have, and who is
I serve all of Monoman County, so Waubun would be mine. Monaga, I want to say, is Heidi Brown, I think, out of Park Rapids. Either that, again, I think you asked me this question before and I didn't know the answer for sure. Or it's Sarah Frisch out of Wadena. So I'm not sure which of them serves. I think it kind of varies on the boundary lines of where in Monaga, maybe.
Yep.
Maureen, do you know how, Bobby, do you know who your voc rehab person is?
Yep, it's me.
Okay, gotcha.
Wonderful. And my name is Jill Esser. I also work at Becker County Human Services. I'm happy to be here and so glad that Wendy has been arranging these meetings, and hope that we just continue to spread the word and increase participation, because we're here to really talk about transition. And Wendy and I were visiting just a little bit before we started, just kind of waiting. And I said, I imagine that it just kind of feels like drowning if you're a parent, because there's so many resources and there's so much information and everything seems important, and it would be maybe hard to know really where to start, and get a good foot forward. And so I kind of said that, as a case manager at the county level, what I see my job is just to help with that process and to keep all those facts and figures and contacts all in place so that you can lean on me as a resource and don't have to keep it all memorized and things like that. So kind of like a gatekeeper or someone who has the key to some of these things, and also just to help you as much as possible through these years, which I think can produce a little bit of an anxiety. So I had a really wonderful opportunity yesterday to talk with a parent who I've been working with her daughter, and she touched on just everything transition related. And so I'm just going to kind of go through kind of a list of things that, as a parent with someone turning 18 in the next year or so, she was wondering about. So, she wondered about like guardianship. Do I need to do that? How do I do that? She wondered about medical assistance. So her kiddo has medical assistance, but she's turning 18. Does that mean it changes? She wasn't sure. So Under medical assistance, there's lots of things. Like there's a program for folks who normally wouldn't qualify for medical assistance due to income. There's a program called TEFRA. So she had questions on TEFRA. If you've ever heard that term, TEFRA, she had questions about that. She had questions about Social Security disability. When do I apply? How do I apply? Is there someone who can help me? She had questions about transition services in general, employment, housing, education, and then just community resources. Are there things in the community that my young adult could be benefiting from? And so my hope as a case manager is to really just help parents through that phase, help young adults to understand the next steps. So that's kind of what I see my role as. I am really, really happy that both Ruth and Amber are here today, because when I present or when I talk to folks, I tend to stay in my lane, and I'm talking about the services that I provide. So I am a waiver case manager at Becker County Human Services, and I work specifically with folks with cognitive disabilities or related conditions related to that. And sometimes I forget that the parents that I'm talking to in different forums maybe have a family member who has a health condition or a mental health condition, and that maybe wouldn't necessarily be my area of expertise. And so we do have people at the county who are in a similar role to both myself and Ruth, who also works in disability services, who focus more on those areas. So Amber would be one of them. So I'm glad she's here today. So on a daily basis, some of what I do is working with individuals who have a cognitive disability or a related condition. A lot of times that's autism, but it could be others, other type of neurodevelopmental disorders. And the primary role of the position really is to help to find funding so that people can remain in their homes and remain in the community. So what we call this is home and community-based services. So home and community-based services can vary, but most of them are provided by medical assistance. And so for some families, we are a bit surprised when we had never met them yet. They hadn't been through the system per se. And a lot of times what we find is that's because the individual and their family with a disability never didn't qualify for medical assistance, or they didn't access TEFRA. And so they never really were involved. And so we meet them kind of at the transition phase when they may need additional services. So those additional services sometimes could be related to employment. So perhaps a job coach, or they may be related to housing. Maybe the individual's goal is to no longer live in the family home, but to live in the community in one way or another. And so there's different waiver funding options for those kind of situations. When we talk about the county kind of being the key to a lot of the funding things, and I talk about waiver at the very top of the chat, if you have access to it, there's just a video from the Department of Human Services that just talks about what is a waiver, kind of the basics of it. So if you have time to kind of come back or go back at some point and watch that, that might be helpful for you. But we do have other programs that are not paid for with waiver funds. And so at the county here, we would be able to help you out with some of those programs, whether it be the Family Support Grant or the Consumer Support Grant. And we have a lot of individuals too who only are accessing personal care assistance services in their home. So I always think of it as a little bit of looking at kind of a sliding scale up of support needs. And so at the bottom, you might have a program like the Family Support Grant, which provides a little over $3,000 a year to provide disability-related needs to someone who is not on a more higher level program like personal care assistance or a waiver program. And so I kind of see them all kind of going up, and then at the very top is those waiver programs that have a lot of funding tied to them. And if your family member does qualify for a waiver, how that usually happens is there is an assessment that occurs once a year. It's an annual assessment called a Min Choices assessment. There is a certified assessor from the county who will come out to your home and conduct this assessment. And that assessment on a yearly basis just determines what services someone might be eligible for. And so for some families, that might just be personal care assistance. And so we're looking at how many hours of assistance do they need to meet their activities of daily living in the home. And so people can go back and forth. Maybe some years someone is eligible for a waiver and some years they are not eligible for a waiver. But that's all determined at this yearly assessment that families go through. Oh, Ruth, can you think of anything that I am missing?
I think you're you're doing an outstanding job. You're very detailed. I like the way you put it, where you take a look at it as a scale, because just the family support grant, the consumer support grant being less funding, meaning there's less need because that person is being supported in their home by their family, by the school. And then as they transition into more adulthood, then the funding ramps up to support people when those informal supports naturally go away, sometimes naturally go away, or you move in that direction. Um, so, and Amber, maybe you can talk a little bit too about like the mental health piece, because we do see dual diagnoses. We see people with developmental disabilities who also have mental health issues, and so Amber, do you want to talk a little bit about the mental health side?
Well, what I was going to also say is that I think we sometimes see people say, well, I'm not going to qualify for something. And so we don't know until you actually call, until we actually do the assessment, until we actually see where people might fall when it comes to income, because there's all different sorts of income and there's all different sorts of qualifications for different programs. And so rather than just assuming that you're not going to qualify because of where you might fall with your income, it's calling and actually applying and going through the process, because there's different criteria for each program. So that's kind of one of the biggest things, is just going through the process rather than just assuming. But yes, there's the different programs. There's the dual diagnoses, that go on, and so we best fit. So if there might be someone that might fall into the DD category, but there might be also someone who has the mental health. And so that's where we work together when it comes to like the waiver. That's why we have waiver case managers that are in the behavioral health unit, which is the unit that I'm in. But, both Jill and Ruth are in the adult service unit. They work with adult services, which is the DD, and the elderly waiver. I mean, so there's different categories that everyone is in. The public health has more of the medical piece. So if there's somebody who might fall into the mental health or DD category but has more medical issues as far as waiver goes, they may have a public health nurse as their waiver case manager because maybe their needs are more medical. So it just kind of depends on where their needs are and where they might best fit as far as a waiver case manager goes.
Absolutely. So
And
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I feel like something that we have been talking amongst ourselves and maybe seeing a little bit more from the community is maybe an assumption that if a person is on medical assistance and they have a disability, they automatically have a case manager. And that isn't necessarily true. Again, Amber's talking about this assessment that people can go through. It's called that, like as Jill stated, it's that Min Choice assessment. That assessment can lead to programs that person might be eligible for, and case management is one of them. I know there's I'm looking at who's attending, and there's not a ton of family. However, I feel like the more we can communicate and educate families about, what their options are, what their resources are through the county, to reach out to, if they're struggling navigating through processes and systems, to reach out and request that they have a case management or a case manager assigned. Again, there's a process for that. We have to determine that they meet the disability standards, that are that they truly are, they have a disability diagnosis, or there's diagnostic testing that has happened that can substantiate, that disability. But I think the more we educate families about, what the resources are for them, the better. But again, I think the assumption is everybody has a case manager because they're on MA, and that's not accurate. So go ahead, Jill.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to, talk about that when we're thinking about that MnChoices assessment. It's completed every year, and then decisions are made about services and what you may qualify for. I wanted to just talk a little bit about how at the county, everything is really done as a team. So we have assessors who work in all different units, and we have case managers that work in all different units. So when we're talking about transition age kids, the case managers for waiver services that could be providing services to your family member, there's 9 of us, and we meet weekly. And the people who conduct the assessments, they meet weekly. And so we really try to make sure that we have the best fit possible for, whatever the individual support needs are. One of the suggestions that I would have to families, I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and it was mostly parents who attended this conference. And so it was really good for me to be able, not looking at it from a professional perspective, but from a family's perspective, what they see. And so they asked the group, like, what advice would you have for other families who are in the room today? And I didn't raise my hand because I didn't think about it until afterwards. But the advice that I would give and what I would say today is don't be afraid to call back. So I think the perception sometimes is when people call the county that there just feels to be a lot of barriers. I called and they said they don't have anything for me. I called and they said I'm not eligible. But sometimes the more you talk with professionals, you'll realize we use a lot of lingo, right? And we use a lot of abbreviations. And so if you ask a question, but the person on the other end of the line interprets it differently than what you maybe mean it to, they're like, nope, sorry, that wouldn't work out. So my question is, if you get no, call back. If they tell you no, just call back. You're going to likely get someone else on the phone. I'm not going to say everyone's going to qualify or everyone's going to get what they want, but sometimes it really just is in the way that you're asking the question. And maybe next time someone's on the other end and they understood what you meant the way that you meant it, right? And they're like, oh, but wait, we have this other thing that maybe, you would qualify or benefit from. So just don't take one and done and no for an answer. And you can do that, of course, in a kind and nice way. But sometimes I feel like that is the experience that families have. And then maybe they don't call back for 5 years or 10 years. And then they realize, oh, wait, but there was this thing that I could have been receiving for my family member all this time.
Well, and Jill and I and Ruth are all having to do that amongst even each other, like, and asking questions and clarifying, do you know what this means? Or do you have an idea what this might be interpreted as? Or someone asked me this question and, oh yeah, Ruth can answer a question. She's like, yeah, this means, employment questions, or just, waiver questions or whatever. It helps just amongst ourselves to even do that. So just to tell them, call back, ask a question again can be helpful.
Yeah. So, when you are working with the county, and one of the advantages of if you're able to get a case manager for your family member is you have access to just a lot of information, a lot of resources, a lot of connections that you might not know about in the community. But for folks that work with me, they're not just getting me, they're getting access actually to this whole wealth of knowledge of all these other people that I work with as well. And we're constantly asking and trying to find solutions to, problems that people may face. So I was going to try and share some resources, but I'm not sure how to do that. So I think we might just attach them to an email that we'll send out. One of them is to PACER, and PACER is the organization that's an advocacy organization, deals a lot with education, but also deals with many, many, many other topics. And they put on webinars all the time. And I attend probably every other month. I attend something or another. And they had one just last night that was on supported decision making, which is an alternative to guardianship. And so I was just going to share that you can go onto their website, you can look at their past webinars, and you can even go on and just, watch some of those that have occurred already. That's a good resource. I was going to share the ARC Minnesota is also an advocacy organization out in the community. And they are working really hard to find out, I think specifically with transition, how to help more. And so there's a survey that they've been trying to really get families to participate in. So if you're a parent on this call, you may or may not get an email from me from a survey from the ARC. I was also going to share two more resources. One was about Empowering Kids in Perham, which is an agency that works with neurodiverse clients and autistic individuals. And they do a social outing for people who are 18 or over. I don't know if it's once a month, but they have something coming up that they're doing that I was just going to share. So some just kind of options for social activities in the community. And then I felt like there was one more that I was going to share. So if you want information on any of those things that I talked about, you could certainly contact me and I could get them to you, or we will try to attach what we can in an email. I think I'll give everyone a chance to tell us if there's anything that we're missing or any specific questions you might have. And then if anyone wants to share from their experience in their family or working with families, what are the biggest questions that you hear about transition? What is it that families want to know?
I got 3 questions. Can you review how they would access services? Like, do they need to know which department to ask for? When should a family ask for those services? And then if a family is already receiving children's level services, how does the transition to adult services happen?
Oh, well, those are all wonderful. So I'll let everybody, if that's okay, I'll let everyone else take one. I'll take the first one, the accessing services. So to access services, for the most part, you would call the county and say you need an assessment. So this MnChoices assessment, it's a comprehensive assessment from ages 0 to 105. It's the same for everybody. And that is what determines what you may be eligible for. So in general, if you're looking for funding for a service that is going to allow you to remain in your home or community, you want a MnChoices assessment. So they call the county and say, I would like a MnChoices assessment, and they will get you where you need to go.
And if you don't, so I think a lot of people don't even know what they need. They just know they need something. Is that okay to just say, I need something, I don't know what I need, but and then get directed somewhere?
Yeah. So I'll give you a hint here. That goes back to my call again, because here is what tends to happen in my experience, is people will call and say, hi, my family member has this, this, and this. And sometimes the person on the other end of the line will say, well, what do you want? What do you want? Right? And families have no idea. I don't know. What can I get? What's out there? What's available? And so it really depends. If right there you say, well, I want someone to help me pay my rent, you're going to get, no, we don't pay your rent. Sorry. End of conversation, right? Don't take that no. Have them call back, rephrase the question another way. Maybe what they meant is, I need help in supported housing, right? Because I need staff to be with me. That's a different question than I need help to pay my rent. So sometimes it's just how you phrase it. So if they don't know what they need, but it's disability related, right? I would just tell them to ask for a MnChoices assessment, because the assessment gets you all those other things.
So Austin, I was going to say too, part in the conversation of what you're having with them goes to, are you thinking that they might need like children's mental health, case management? Are they needing help, getting coordination of services? Are they needing help getting coordination of, therapy services? Are they needing help getting CTSS coordination? Are they needing help getting medication management? Are they needing help? If it's really around mental health services, then it's children's mental health case management that they're looking for. Do you know what I mean? Versus Are they needing
Yeah,
help
I mean,
with
and
daily cares? Are they needing
like
help with?
yeah, like when I tell people, I say call the county and ask for this department and ask for this specific thing because I know how that works.
Yep,
But if it's outside of mental health, though, I
yep,
also don't know how it works. And I have also had and I've had clients where I said call the county and they do that same story Jill just said. I called and they said they can't help me, and I'll be like,
Mhm.
I know they can, and I'm
Yeah.
sure it was just that issue.
Right. But if they call and say, I want a min choices assessment, right? Then there's this whole long thing that we have to ask them all these questions to put the
Yep.
intake in. And in
Yep.
that process, we'll be like, whoa, no, they don't want a min choices assessment. They want someone to help accessing children's mental health services. So I think if they go for the min choices assessment as the default, it's going to weed those folks out and
Yes.
for them where they need to go. Does that sound
Yep.
right?
hmm There's also situations that I've run across where I have been assigned again that case management, that Rule 185 determination. And again, I'm using jargon from the county, but on the application, it will ask the applicant to say it'll ask the question, why are you applying today for case management? And more than a couple times, I've seen the response be, well, I want to have everything that I can have that will give me a jump on services, or I want to have everything that I'm trying to remember how it was phrased. Everything that everything that I can get to give me a head start. So parents are just reaching out to, they're not sure what they need. They don't know what services are out there. They're just saying, hey, I know something is out there and I want it. I want that for my child. And so, you know, when you ask, when should people be asking for that support? Anytime, really. We have very small children. Jill has the majority of the kids on the caseload, and she's got very, very small children, very young children whose parents are reaching out because there's an unmet need. And in my opinion, the sooner the better, because we can help navigate those families through those processes. It might be initially with younger kids that state plans like medical assistance are paying for things like personal care assistant in the home, so their needs are being met that way. But to keep a pulse on how that child is doing and what they might need as they age is an important thing. So that was just another thought. I can't remember the last question, and I don't know whose turn it is to answer it, but
It was, how does the transition work if the kid is already having services? Because we have a lot of kids in CTSS or whatever, and I know they would qualify for ARMS, but I don't. I know a lot of them don't seek it out, and there's other services. Basically, a lot of the children's services, they seem to just disappear once a kid graduates because the kids aren't real good at. A lot of times they don't know they exist, and if you don't know they exist, they don't happen. So.
Yep. Amber, do you want to answer that?
So I was just going to say, so if they have a mental health case manager, then if they have a mental health case manager, we're able to do transition services. We can continue with them if they're a children's mental health case manager, as long as they're continuing their education, or we can refer them on to adult mental health case management. We can do that transition service with them, and then even refer them on for ARM service. If it's waiver, it's kind of an easier transition because it actually just continues on with them. There's no age category, there's no start and stop date. It's just literally kind of their annual reassessment happens just like it would as though they were underage. It's just now they're going into adult. And when their assessment happens, is they as far as their like insurance, everything kind of gets looked at again, whether they're SMRTed or they are certified disabled. Everything kind of just gets looked at during that reassessment time. So it just kind of depends. But if they are Rule 79 case management, that's a little bit different, where they're looked at, and those are the ones that I think are falling through the cracks more. just because you're right, they get that option. And I think so often with that mental health case management, they're choosing to kind of opt out. They're saying, I've had this person who's been bothering me in their mind. My parents have been making me do this. I don't want to do this anymore. I just want to be left alone, versus seeing it as a benefit. Where I think the waiver, they're seeing it as more of, they're seeing more of a benefit. They're seeing this more of a support.
Mhm. On the waiver side of things, on the DD side of things, I have two younger adults that are in the transitions program right now that are reaching, the end of their school year, and they're not on a waiver yet. And so part of the case manager role is to kind of monitor their transition into adulthood, out of school, into the community, and make sure that there's no lapse. Because when the school is done, we want to make sure that they're on a waiver, that they get placed on a waiver, and that there are supports and services that are waiting to initiate services with them. Because we don't want to hiccup, we don't want them to go without services. We don't want to have a gap there. So yes, I agree, Amber. In some sense, it is a much smoother transition, because those people are mostly eager to continue with those services and supports. They want them, and they're agreeable to them and looking forward to them. So it is a little easier process, I guess.
Is there a list somewhere, or a pamphlet or something that of the adult services that are out there? Because I think what happens a lot of times, like they said, Amber, you said these kids are sick of somebody bothering them. They want to try it on their own. Then after a little while, they realize they can't do it on their own. But by then, we don't have hands on them anymore. And I think they would be a little more likely to come back if they knew where to go and what was an option even.
So I think those ones that are, the agencies that are doing CTSS, I mean, your solutions, um, m- you know, oh my gosh, Lakeland, those ones are, providing the arms that are here in Detroit Lakes, being able to have those conversations. The thing is that it's whether they qualify, and they have to have an updated DA, and they have to be SPMI in order to, they have to have that diagnosis. And so it's an updated DA that has to
Yep.
happen once they're
Well, and I
18.
mean, like other services too, like housing and that sort of thing too. Because I know we've had kids that they graduate and then I find out they're homeless.
And that's the tricky
Yes.
part.
Like,
My hubby does a transition program, with their housing. They can't see, that's where it gets really tricky, because you can't apply for the housing until they're 18. They can't be on their own. And that's where it gets really tricky, because they can't do some of that stuff until they can legally apply and legally sign their own documents.
So two things. There's the ARC Minnesota has a West Central Regional Quality Council that runs, and they are trying to put together like a transition guide of services specific to our area, right? And so when that gets done, I will distribute that to you, Austin. But also the Minnesota Disability Law Center has something that I just sent you in your email, and it's called Into Adulthood, Your Guide to Disability Access. And it covers everything: Social Security, housing, county services. What about MA and SNAP benefits, cash kind of things like that through financial services. So I did send that to you, but it's not specific to our region, if that's what you were looking for.
No, it's good. It's just something I've been trying to build into our CTSS, is more focus on what happens once we lose track of them. Because it happens a lot.
I think the more
they're doing good,
conversations,
then they graduate. And now what?
I think it's more leading up to those, like, hey, when you turn 18, like, let's get ready. Let's, the more conversations that you can have with them. I had one that I was having conversations like the whole year prior, like we're turning 18. The whole year prior, like we're turning 18 here in June, we're turning 18 here in June. And I started having the conversations in July because I knew that turning 18 in June was going to be so rough because the follow through was going to be hard. In that first month of turning 18 was pretty rough, because it was like he just didn't believe me. I mean, just didn't think, and it was like the MA lapsed. I mean, everything just kind of fell apart, and then it was like, "Yep, okay, you're gonna be you're gonna be kicked out. You're gonna have to,"
Well,
and then,
and
yep,
the paperwork for a lot of these programs is pretty intense too.
hmm
You know, I mean, I do my son is on disability, and I have to do that every year, and yeah, it's like doing your taxes,
yeah,
you know, and every year. And you know, if you're 18 and you know, yeah, you're struggling with all of this stuff, and then somebody's like, well, just fill out this. It's
Right.
easy to just go, never mind.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I think too, for those specific cases, the kids who are already on Social Security, it's good for families, parents, providers to know, when they turn 18, there's a whole evaluation that they're going to do. And it's really easy for the kids just to say, I'm not going to return that. And then their Social Security stops. So there is that at 18 that, that will have to be updated. Even if it's not time for their annual review, it'll update on their 18th birthday. I also have a couple of other resources that I can send out if anyone's interested in them. Resource guides. The one that I was really looking for, one is called Build a Bridge. It's a resource manual for high school students. But the one I was looking for actually has a checklist in it. So what might be easiest is if you are a provider of services, before somebody exits, is to say, well, do you know how to do this yet? Or do you need help with it? Do you know how to do this yet? Or do you need help with it? And I think there's a pre-ETS inventory that I've seen somewhere that maybe covers some of that. So, there are those types of resources that you could go over before they walk out your door and, they're off into the world. One of the other resources that I was going to share, two actually, the other one that I had forgotten about was Empowering Kids also has a parent support group that I think they have started in the last year and a half, and you can do it virtually. So I think there's a Zoom link. So if anyone wanted the information to that to disseminate to families, or as a family member wanted to participate, that is through Empowering Kids. And something that I use on a weekly basis is the ARC Minnesota, which is that parent advocacy organization. They have developed resource guides, 1 to 2 pages, that help you when you're struggling, especially with all these acronyms. So someone mentioned in terms of medical assistance, SMRT. Well, then we could look at SMRT, right? They have the ARC guide to SMRT. They have the ARC guide to TEFRA. They have the ARC guide to Social Security, the ARC guide to MA, the ARC guide to a disability waiver, the ARC guide to a CADI waiver. So right on their website, they're fantastic. I send them out to families and professionals all the time because the stuff that we get is linked to statute and laws that fund it. And it's really jargon intense. And so if you want like it coming to a family who just want the details, the information, some of those ARC guides too are really, really good. In fact, I think they even have a list of abbreviations and acronyms all compiled together. So the only other thing that I was wondering is, other than Austin, is there anyone else who maybe has these are the top couple of things that families are wondering about in terms of transition, or that you have heard families ask over and over again that, as case managers, we need to be more mindful about in our work with families with kids this age? As I'm taking notes.
I don't want to monopolize, but I would just say communication is always the key, you know, and if there are opportunities to meet with groups at the schools or the ALC and communicate with people what's out there and how to access it, I think all that would be good.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
I think Becker County has been really good when we reach out as a district, case managers, hey, do you know if anybody has this person on their caseload? You know, I think Becker County has been really good to work with us as a district too, and providing resources. I think my biggest takeaway from this is tell people to call and ask for a Min Choices assessment. And because it is a whole different language at the county, just like it's a whole different language in education, and, you know, any jargon, and you don't know what you don't know. And so when parents have called in, like you said, asking for, I don't know, somebody told me I should call. Well, what are you asking? Now we can say, ask for a Min Choices assessment.
Yeah.
That's a great first step, first place to start.
Mhm.
Okay, well, if there's no other burning questions, I'm going to thank Ruth and Jill and Amber very much for the presentation. I'm going to stop recording, actually.